What if the sky wasn't as safe as it seemed? What if a simple flight turned into a battleground, not of violence, but of power, control, and hidden agendas? Some passengers follow the rules. Others create them. At 35,000 feet, a confrontation brews, one born from arrogance, and another from the deadly mistake of underestimating the wrong man. In the air, justice doesn't knock politely. It descends, swift, sharp, and unforgettable. Buckle up. This flight is about to change everything. The air inside the first-class cabin of Skyward Airlines was cool and fragrant, with subtle notes of citrus and leather, luxury woven into every inch of space. Rows of cream-colored seats gleamed under soft lighting, and the hum of the engines was a low, steady whisper, promising a smooth flight ahead. Knox Wilder stepped aboard with the calm precision of a man who was used to being in control. Dark suit pressed to perfection, platinum cufflinks gleaming, his every movement exuded quiet dominance. Other passengers glanced up, instinctively straightening in their seats, not because he demanded attention, but because he commanded it simply by existing. Behind him, Ivy Quinn Wilder moved gracefully, her hand resting lightly on their daughter's shoulder. Her sapphire eyes scanned the cabin with a softness that contrasted her husband's steel. She wore elegance effortlessly, golden hair swept into a neat bun, tailored cream blouse hugging her frame. Where Knox was ice, Ivy was light, his balance in a world that bent to his will. "Come here, sweetheart." Ivy's voice was gentle as she helped 5-year-old Lily climb onto the plush seat by the window. Lily clutched her tiny toy airplane to her chest, her eyes sparkling with excitement. "Mommy, look. We're flying so high." Ivy chuckled, buckling the seatbelt snug around her daughter's waist. "Not yet, baby. But soon." Knox adjusted his cufflink, then checked his watch with a flick of his wrist. Every movement was deliberate, practiced, a man who didn't waste time, didn't tolerate delays. His gaze shifted to Ivy, and for a moment, the sharp edges of his face softened. She caught the look and smiled. "You can relax, Mr. Wilder. This is a vacation, remember?" Knox's lips curved, just barely. "Relaxing is not my specialty." Ivy reached over, brushing her fingers against his hand. "That's why you have me." For a brief moment, there was peace, a rare and quiet calm that felt untouchable. But peace, like perfection, can shatter in an instant. And at 35,000 feet, control is an illusion. The plane had begun taxiing, the low hum of the engines vibrating beneath their feet. Flight attendants moved with practiced ease, offering drinks, adjusting seatbacks, smiles in place, but one smile didn't quite reach the eyes. Lauren Whitman moved down the aisle like she owned it. Her emerald green hair was styled in perfect waves, makeup flawless, uniform pristine. Everything about her screamed polished professionalism, except for the way her eyes locked onto the Wilder family, sharp and assessing. She approached with a smile that didn't warm her face. "Good evening, sir. I'm Lauren, the head attendant for today's flight." Her tone was honeyed, but her gaze was pure ice. "May I see your boarding passes, please?" Ivy blinked, confused. "Is something wrong?" Lauren's smile didn't falter. "Just a routine check." Knox didn't flinch. With slow, deliberate precision, he reached into his jacket and pulled out the tickets, pristine, embossed with gold, bearing the unmistakable seal of Skyward Airlines first-class elite. His eyes met Lauren's. Cool. Unreadable. "Here." Lauren took them, and instead of a cursory glance, she examined them with excessive scrutiny, turning each one over, reading, rereading, as though she expected them to disintegrate in her hands. Ivy's fingers tightened slightly on Lily's shoulder. Something wasn't right. Lauren finally looked up, voice still syrupy, but colder now. "Thank you. I'll just need to verify a few details with the front desk." Please remain seated. Without waiting for a response, she turned and walked away, heels clicking against the polished floor. The air shifted. Gone was the serenity of a luxury flight, now replaced by tension that crackled like a live wire. Ivy turned to Knox, eyes narrowing. That wasn't routine. Lily tugged at her sleeve, voice small. Mommy. Why did she take our tickets? Ivy smiled gently, trying to soothe her daughter, but inside, her nerves were fraying. Knox leaned back in his seat, arms folding across his chest, eyes fixed on the aisle. Cold. Calculating. He didn't need to speak. Ivy could feel it, the storm was coming. And Lauren Whitman had just made a mistake. Minutes passed. The low hum of the aircraft continued, but Ivy could feel every second stretch, thick with anticipation. Lily had fallen quiet, sensing the unease, her small hand gripping Ivy's fingers tightly. Then Lauren returned. Her smile was gone. This time, her posture was stiffer, her chin raised slightly, voice laced with authority that felt forced, brittle. There's an issue with your tickets, she said, her gaze sweeping over them with clinical detachment. We'll need to move your family to economy class immediately. For a moment, silence. Ivy's brows knit in disbelief. Excuse me. Lauren didn't blink. There's been a complication in the reservation system. Your current seats have been flagged for reassignment. Knox didn't move for a long beat. Then, slowly, he lifted his head, eyes locking onto hers with a force that could freeze blood. My tickets, he said, voice low and razor sharp, are valid and paid in full. Show me what system you're referring to. Lauren hesitated, just a flicker, but Knox caught it. He always did. Sir, this is standard procedure when anomalies are detected in first-class bookings. Anomalies? Ivy echoed, voice tight with fury. We've done nothing wrong. You're targeting us. Why? Lauren's jaw clenched, her eyes darting to the other passengers who were now watching, murmuring, sensing something wasn't right. Knox didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. He leaned back in his seat, hands folding neatly over his chest. His stare cut through Lauren like ice through glass. You've made a mistake, he said coldly. And I suggest you think very carefully about what you do next. The air in the cabin turned suffocating. Lauren swallowed hard, but stood her ground. Barely. And Ivy, though burning with anger, sat still, elegant, composed. A force in her own right. Lauren had no idea who she had just tried to cross. But she was about to find out. Knox remained silent. His expression didn't change, no flare of anger, no sign of emotion. He simply reached into the inner pocket of his jacket and pulled out his phone with the same calm precision he used to sign multimillion-dollar deals. A few taps. One message. Execute the plan. Then he set the phone down on the armrest, his eyes still fixed on Lauren, who stood stiffly, trying to maintain the last threads of her authority. Moments later, her phone rang. The shrill tone shattered the silence, and her hands flew to her pocket. She glanced at the caller ID, Alexander Sinclair, and her face paled. Knox leaned back, his voice still cold and calm. You should answer that. Lauren swallowed hard, pressed the phone to her ear. Hello, sir. The voice on the other end was sharp. Furious. Lauren Whitman, are you out of your mind? She flinched. Sir, Do you know who you just tried to humiliate? Knox Wilder is not just a first-class passenger. He's one of our top shareholders, and the reason you have a job. Lauren's knees nearly buckled. Sweat gathered at her brow. I didn't realize. I thought. You thought wrong, Sinclair snapped. If he wants, your employment ends now. Fix it. And pray he shows mercy. The line went dead. Lauren's hand dropped slowly, the phone slipping from her fingers, landing on the seat beside her with a dull thud. She stared at Knox, no longer with authority, but with fear. He didn't speak. He didn't have to. He'd already won. Lauren returned, her stride slower, her face drained of color. The mask of professionalism she had worn so confidently before was cracking, splintering. Her hands trembled slightly as she clutched the boarding passes. "Nye Wilder," she began, voice tight, but forcefully polite, "I sincerely apologize for the inconvenience. There was a system error, but it has been resolved. Please continue enjoying your flight." Her words hung awkwardly in the air. Knox didn't move. He studied her for a long moment, then slowly raised an eyebrow, a slight, deliberate arch that carried more weight than any raised voice ever could. "You think a simple apology erases what you just did?" His tone was ice, sharp and clean. Lauren's throat bobbed as she swallowed hard. Ivy shifted beside him, slipping her hand into his, a gentle squeeze. Her eyes met his, a silent plea, "Don't escalate it further." Not for them. Not for Lily. Knox's gaze flicked to her briefly. He didn't say a word. Instead, he gently placed his other hand over hers, grounding her. Then his eyes locked back on Lauren. He didn't have to yell. He didn't need to threaten. His silence was the threat. All around them, the cabin was hushed. Passengers leaned subtly from their seats, watching, whispering. Recognition sparked in some of their eyes. The name Wilder carried weight. Now they saw why. Power didn't always speak. Sometimes, it just looked at you. Lauren nodded quickly, her voice barely a whisper. "Once again, sir. I'm deeply sorry." Knox tilted his head slightly, dismissive. "You should be." Lauren stepped back, defeated. And in that moment, everyone knew, she wasn't in control. She never had been. The plane touched down smoothly hours later, but the turbulence had only just begun, for Skyward Airlines. Lauren Whitman was nowhere in sight when Knox, Ivy, and Lily disembarked. Her absence said more than words ever could. By the time the wheels hit the tarmac, an internal memo had already circulated through the airline's upper ranks. Lauren Whitman suspended pending internal investigation. She never saw it coming. What she had dismissed as a routine power play had spiraled into a career-ending miscalculation. Her name was flagged, her conduct reviewed, and as the evidence mounted, including previous complaints buried in red tape, it became clear, this wasn't an isolated incident. It was patterned discrimination. And Skyward Airlines couldn't bury it anymore. The next morning, headlines exploded across business and news outlets alike. Skyward Airlines faces scandal, executive passenger humiliated, company issues public apology. Knox Wilder exposes airline misconduct, forces corporate overhaul. The airline's CEO, Alexander Sinclair, wasted no time. In a rare televised statement, he stood behind a podium, face grim. "On behalf of Skyward Airlines, I extend a formal and personal apology to Mr. Wilder and his family. We are committed to ensuring no passenger experiences unfair treatment. Effective immediately, we are launching a complete review of our training protocols and customer service standards." It wasn't just a PR move. It was survival. The damage was real, and public perception was shifting. But amid the chaos, one name stood untouched, elevated even higher. Knox Wilder. To some, he was the ruthless magnate who silenced opposition with a glance. To others, he became a symbol of justice wielded with precision, proof that power, when used right, could force change. He hadn't just protected his family. He'd set a precedent. And the world was watching. The tarmac shimmered under the late afternoon sun as the Wilder family stepped off the private ramp, the chaos of the flight fading behind them like a distant echo. Knox walked with effortless poise, one hand resting in his pocket, the other holding Lily's as she skipped beside him, toy airplane clutched tight in her arms. Ivy trailed just behind, eyes on her husband, something flickering in her gaze, curiosity, admiration. Amusement. "You knew, didn't you?" she asked softly, catching up to him. "That it would play out like this?" Knox didn't slow his stride. He simply glanced over his shoulder, lips curving into the faintest smile. "I always know how to control a situation." There was no arrogance in his voice, just quiet truth. Lily beamed up at him, eyes wide with awe. "Daddy, you're so cool." Knox chuckled, reaching down to tousle her hair. "Just smart, sweetheart. Always stay 10 steps ahead." Ivy shook her head, a laugh slipping from her lips as she looped her arm through his. "You're impossible." "I prefer unstoppable," he replied, gaze distant for a moment, as if already calculating his next move. Ivy knew this man, her man. He wasn't just wealthy. He wasn't just powerful. He was a man who never allowed anyone to decide his fate. Because in Knox Wilder's world, control wasn't taken, it was owned. Within 24 hours, the incident had gone viral. Clips recorded by fellow passengers flooded social media, grainy footage of Lauren's confrontation, the whispered recognition of Knox Wilder, and the stunned silence when the tables turned. Hashtags trended worldwide. #Wilder Justice, #Service or Disservice, #Power Moves in the Sky. News anchors debated it. Podcasts dissected it. The public couldn't get enough, a powerful man, calm and composed, defending his family not with outrage, but with precision. But the story wasn't just about Knox. It was about injustice, the kind that hides behind fake smiles and policies misused. And people demanded answers. Skyward Airlines had no choice. The internal investigation into Lauren Whitman revealed a history of selective service violations, subtle but frequent, discrepancies in seat assignments, ignored complaints, biased behavior. She was terminated. Not quietly. Publicly. Sinclair, under immense pressure, announced sweeping changes to company policy. Mandatory retraining for all staff. New oversight protocols for customer service. Zero tolerance for discriminatory behavior at any level. Skyward Airlines wasn't just trying to repair its image. It was trying to survive. And Knox. He didn't grant interviews. He didn't need to. His silence spoke volumes. He hadn't just defended his family. He had forced accountability, ignited reform, and left a lasting message. Power is not about volume. It's about impact. And he had changed the game, without ever raising his voice. Sunlight spilled across the private terrace of the Wilder family's oceanside villa. Waves crashed gently in the distance, a soothing rhythm to match the serenity of a vacation well earned. Knox reclined in a lounge chair, a glass of deep red wine resting between his fingers. He swirled it slowly, eyes fixed on the horizon, but his thoughts were far from idle. Beside him, Ivy watched in silence, her gaze filled with pride, admiration, and a knowing smile. "You can relax now," she teased softly. Knox took a slow sip, then glanced at her, the corner of his mouth twitching. "Relaxing is overrated." Ivy laughed, shaking her head. She knew him too well. Knox Wilder was never truly at rest, not in mind, not in spirit. Behind that calm exterior was a man always calculating, always aware. But beneath it all, he was a man who fought for what mattered. And won. Not through chaos. Not through noise. Through control. As the sun dipped lower, painting the sky in gold and crimson, Knox leaned back, eyes distant yet razor-focused. He hadn't waited for justice. He hadn't asked for it. He had claimed it. Because in his world, no one dictated his fate. And that flight wasn't just a lesson for Skyward Airlines. It was a reminder to anyone watching. Some men don't play by the rules. They write them. Knox Wilder didn't just take the flight. He owned it.